Welcome to the third season of School of Nock. For this class session, we're going to be focusing on target panic. This is one of the most frustrating aspects of archery and probably one of the things that's the most responsible for people getting so frustrated that they leave the sport. I know because I've been there, I've had it, I struggled with it, I was extremely frustrated with it, and like a lot of you, got to the point where it was almost overwhelming and I was about ready to stop shooting my bow because at times there was just nothing worse than having to go out and shoot at practice or shoot in front of your friends and have that happen, and worse yet, be in that one moment of truth out in the timber and you're not able to make a shot because you're overwhelmed with those feelings of target panic or buck fever. Now, one of the things that I think is important is for you to understand that it's awesome that you're watching this series, because for me, the hardest part of overcoming that was really getting to the point where I was ready to agree that I had a problem with it, but also take the steps forward in order to overcome it. There were certainly times where I made the decision of, I want to get over this. I don't want to be freezing under the target. I don't want to feel that panic to where I'm lifting and punching the trigger at the same time, or trying to hit the trigger and flinching, all those things that are just terrible to deal with. There were times where, although I didn't want to do that, all I was trying to do was continue to put different types of Band-Aids or try different types of placebos in order to try my best to get out of it. But the reality was, what finally was able to get me back into the light, get my head above water, was when I made that conscious effort and the continual effort to deal with this. So this whole series is going to be broke down into multiple elements that's going to allow you to do the different steps that I've proven through countless numbers of students to be what it takes to fully overcome target panic and execute perfect, surprise, unanticipated shots. Now again, one of the first steps that you have to take is to watch a video like this and really start to let it sink in that yes, I definitely have a problem with target panic. And I know when that moment happens is normally about the time where your release is coming to your anchor position and you're starting to properly look through the peep sight and you're looking at that pin, aiming at the target. You start to feel all of those nerves build up. So when that happens, if you're in the right mindset of, okay, here we go, this is happening again. What have I learned from the School of Nock, or what do I need to do to address these issues? I'm going to help you through that, and I guarantee you can get through it. But what's critical is that every time you feel that from here forward, you understand it's going to be okay. These are the things that I knew were going to happen. These are things that I'm going to expect to happen, and it's all right. I'm going to take those steps. I'm going to deal with it. And the reality is, if you feel some of those things, it's actually good. And the reason it's good is because once you address it and once you identify it, you're going to struggle with it. You might struggle with it a couple times. You might struggle with it a few weeks. However, there's going to be a time where you're fully aware that that's happening, and then you're going to do everything right to where you execute the perfect shot, just like you're going to learn here, and you learn, holy cow, I just overcame it. Now, you're not going to be able to do that every time right out of the gate, or if you do, awesome. But for me, I specifically and vividly remember the first time I ever drew my bow back, and granted, this was over a decade into my archery career or being a bow hunter. I vividly remember that time where I went and got some help from a professional archer I really trusted. He gave me a release, told me how to shoot it right for a perfect surprise shot, and I actually went and struggled through the things that some of which I'm sharing with you now, but some other things I was able to identify them, struggle through those, and finally make that one shot. And I still remember that shot to this day of being the first time where I fully 100% trusted my pin on a target floating around. I was anxious. I was feeling some stress being there and trusting it there, not having it froze off the target and trying to force it into the middle and hit the trigger at the same time. I was trusting that, moving around in there, and then all of a sudden that release went off and I had this ultimate surprise and saw that arrow tick-tock right into the center of that target. And I specifically remember that being a turning point for me, to where at that moment I understood this is the shot that everybody's been talking about and that I need to be striving for. At that point, a new bar was set. And I wasn't always hitting that bar from there on forward practicing, but over time, the amount of times that I fell under that bar just lessened and lessened and lessened. So one of the key components to overcoming target panic is understanding and identifying what target panic is. So target panic, from at least my experience, was going back and going into one of my psychology classes and looking at what is anxiety. Because target panic is an anxiety that you feel by trusting your pin floating around within that scoring ring. So that anxiety is a fear or sudden fright. And so understanding that you have that fear or fright, just like we do with a lot of things in life, eventually you're going to be able to understand that nothing terrible is going to happen if you're within that moment, but you do have to take some steps in order to overcome it. So one of the things that I had to do was I had to submerge myself a little bit deeper into understanding why my mind was feeling that sudden fear or fright or that sudden panic in those moments where I had that anxiety of my pin being on the target. So one of the things that you need to understand is that with archery, you have to be able to allow your pin to float around on that target while you dynamically execute a shot. So you're going to dynamically be continually pulling on that bow, and you're going to let that pin float around, and you're going to let the shot go off. But what's hard about that is when you see movement on the front sight, you start to worry about, I'm going to miss. And that fear of missing is a lot of times what causes you to not want to see that movement that's within that scoring ring. One of the things that I learned, and one of the things that's super important, is for you to understand that a lot of times when your mind wants you to do or knows that you want to do something and it's trying to, process that protocol to make that happen, there's certain things that your conscious and your subconscious are going to be processing, and sometimes they fight each other and they cause those moments of anxiety because you don't really realize that although it may not appear like it's doing what you want, it's doing something in return to try to help you. One of those things is, for example, when you take a sight pin and you cover up a target. So you know that if you want to hit the center of that spot, if you've sighted your bow in properly, your bow should be sighted in to hit wherever that pin is. Just like the crosshairs on a rifle or that front bead on a shotgun. So you know that where that is, that front green pin, if you're shooting a fiber, where that front green pin is, that's where that arrow is going to go. So what a lot of people get anxious about is when that pin is moving around on the spot. And trust me, even though I shoot good groups at times, and at other times people tell me it looks like you're holding your bow so still and so steady that it's not even moving off the spot, that's why you can shoot good. That's not true. I always have movement. but I also have minimal movement now that I've been less anxious about the amount of movement that I'm okay with and that I understand that I'm going to see. And here's why. So if you're telling yourself, I want you to hit that spot. I want to hit that spot. And you know, I need my pin on that spot. So in turn, you're covering that pin, and your subconscious mind is wanting to say, hey, I know John's over there going through conscious thoughts and a conscious process of trying to execute this perfect shot, and he wants me to hit dead center in that dot. However, even though he's telling me I want to hit that dot, your subconscious wants to make sure that that dot is still there. Yet your conscious mind is covering that object that your subconscious is trying to hit. So you're going to actually have times where your mind is going to want to confirm with itself that what you're telling it to do is still actually there. So if you're covering a spot and all of a sudden it's moving off, moving off, moving off, what's happening is your subconscious is moving that just enough to where it can see the confirmation of what you're telling it to hit is in fact still there. But in return, it also immediately says, yep, I see what you're telling me is still there. I'm cool with that. Go ahead and move back. So if you think about what your sight picture really does when it's on a target, and a good exercise, try this without your finger on the trigger. Just try to hold on the target, and you're not having to think about setting the trigger off. You're just like, I'm going to pull back, and I'm just going to do what John's saying, and I'm going to put my pin on the target. What you're going to find is you're going to have some movement, and that movement, again, is confirmation movement. Move off the target, I see it, I'm fine, go ahead and go back there. I'm looking at the target, I see it, I'm fine, go ahead and go back there. A lot of times what you'll find is you never fully move off the target if you're trusting that movement. Now the negative thing that you can do is when you want to just see the target the whole time, so you're just freezing in one place with that target off the pin, and what happens is you freeze there, your subconscious is 100% saying, yeah, it's there, and you're rock solid, and what happens is you end up having to lift the pin to the target and hit a trigger at the same time. The problem with that is there are days where you could not be beat in how accurate you are because your timing's perfect, but there's also days where you might have a little added pressure and you start to feel a little bit of anxiety and that timing's off and the results can be disastrous. So you have to go and try this at home, aim at a target with your finger off your trigger and see, yes, I move around, but my movement actually isn't that bad. This is something I'm comfortable with because now I understand the fact that my subconscious wants confirmation, wants to make me happy. My conscious is going through the shot process, part of which is including putting the pin on the target. So those two things are going to go hand in hand, and it's critical that you start to accept that because you're going to start to accept your natural float, your natural movement, and you're also going to slowly start to become more and more comfortable with how much of that you see. Now, one of the things I'm going to promise you is through this course, there's going to be times where you're certainly going to see a lot of movement and you're probably going to struggle. However, don't be afraid to do a few things. One, anytime you start to identify any of these steps moving forward is causing you to feel that anxiety or feel that rush of buck fever or target panic again, then just go ahead and step back, go back a few steps to an earlier process to where you're going to be comfortable with that. For example, if you go from school week 1 and you're totally comfortable with this, you've tried some of these exercises, you've taken time and had some time to think about this and say, yep, I'm on board with this 100%. I'm going to give this all I have. No excuses. I'm not going to cut any corners. I'm not going to go to one step ahead of another just because I think I'm ready. I'm going to go ahead and follow this just like I'm being told for an entire week, focusing on continual practice and development through that process until you're ready for that next step. If you get to that next step and you start to feel like I'm not ready yet, go back to the step before. Believe me, overcoming target panic for me, because I was a competition archer and shooting professional events, it was a struggle for me because I shot 26 to 40 professional events a year with this issue. So it was hard, and there were certainly times where I'd want to shoot one style of equipment, but I really couldn't because there was one particular release that for me always allowed me to have unanticipated surprise shots. Every time I tried to go away from that so that I had what I thought was more control on my shot, I actually lost control of all of the hard work that I put in to getting to that point where I thought I was ready to go to the next step. So you really want to just understand this is a process. And in the end, you're definitely going to be the best archer you've ever been, and you're going to develop the key fundamentals that really separate the world's top level archers and the most professional archery athletes on the planet are all the ones that when they're at their best, they have surprise, unanticipated shots. There's certainly professional archers that at times are on a level to where it's hard to even fathom. But if they struggle with trigger control or wanting to control their shot, then a lot of times they also fall off the map because they're struggling with these issues. For me personally, I've found so much comfort and relief and love in the sport of archery because I know that I'm going to have days where I don't shoot amazing, but I do know that I can always shoot good because I'm sitting there focusing on surprise, unanticipated shots. They're not going to all be perfect, but there's certainly days where if you have proper technique, you're perfect the whole day, and it's amazing, and archery is the funnest thing that you can possibly do. So one of these steps are going to be for you to go and identify how much float do you have on a target when you're not really sitting there thinking about firing the trigger. And if you move your finger to the trigger, are you able to accept that, or now are you freezing? It's definitely an identifier that you're struggling with this fright or this terror. Now, one of the things that I found pretty amazing is that although people feel like they're afraid to miss a target, what I've found is that you're actually afraid to hit a target when you're dealing with target panic or buck fever. Because if you think about it, you know that your bow is going to hit behind the pin, or your arrow is going to hit where that pin is. So if you feel like you're afraid to miss, then my question to myself back then, and one of the things I eventually laughed at myself about and came to the reality of, I'm not afraid to miss. Because when I'm freezing off the target, it's obvious I'm afraid to hit. And so at that moment, I actually had a bigger issue with me being afraid of hitting something than afraid of missing something. And at that point, it was a mental trigger of, if you're not aiming on the target, then you're afraid of hitting the target. If I was afraid of missing, I would at least be on the target, trusting this, and if the shot happens to break when it's off the target, then that's just where the cards have fallen. So understanding that and coming to the point where you need to be like, I'm definitely not afraid to hit. I'm more afraid of missing. So at least trust the fact that your pin has to be on the target. Now for this series, I'm definitely going to be focusing on what I am adamant about being the number one thing, and probably the only thing, that continually over hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of students, national teams, and including Olympic level archers, the process that I'm going to be teaching is the dynamics of continual tension and tension activation. Now, one of the things that's important is I know a lot of people start to somewhat have a misunderstanding of back tension. A lot of people refer to back tension as being the cure to target panic. Now, there's certainly releases on the market that are referred to as back tension, but in my opinion, the only true tension-based releases on the market, there's a few, two of which are the ones that I adamantly believe that people should be shooting. The Silverback series, and now a wrist strap series, the new back strap. Both of these releases allow you to draw back and go through your shot process, disengaging the safety, and then continually allowing the float to happen and trusting the aspects that I talked to you earlier about, and just continually pulling on that until you've built enough pressure on that release until the shot breaks with a perfect surprise. Now again, I'm a huge believer in two products. The Silverback, which we have two sizes, the Silverback Plus and the Silverback Plus Mini, depending on your hand size. And then now, for the first time, a tension-activated wrist strap release, which you'll be able to draw back, depress the trigger, which disengages the safety, and then continually pull until the release fires with the surprise shot once you've built enough tension on that release. Now, how these releases work is you set them to where they fire once you've pulled a certain pressure against the back wall of the cam. Now, what I recommend, especially if you're dealing with a little bit of target panic for these first few weeks, is setting this at about 5 pounds over what your bow's holding weight is. Now, holding weight is not peak weight. So if you have a 70-pound bow with 80% let off, the peak weight is 70, but once you get to your full draw position and the let off happens, you're only holding 20% of that 70. So you're holding 14 pounds. In that case, I would set either of these tension releases to about 19 pounds so that you can go through these exercises. This is going to be something that I 100% recommend for anyone dealing with target panic over these next classes. You're going to have a week to be able to, one, think about some of the things that I've said. Also, I'd highly recommend you looking at some psychology definitions of things like fright or terror, anxiety, and start to maybe understand what those things are, and then even look at easy ways for me to deal with them. That's what I've done, and over time, I started to realize that some of the things that I was worried about definitely didn't have that much meaning because I was actually missing based on actions that I was doing myself, not so much as actions that were overcoming me. So again, watch back through this for the next few days, think about it, and if you're ready to take that step of overcoming target panic or buck fever, then make sure you show up to the next class.